guidance that moves lives forward.
Hi, I'm Wendy, and this is Divorce Doesn't Suck. I'm talking all about the life you can live after divorce. You'll hear regular people's stories about their divorces and how they reinvented themselves and grew. You'll also get invaluable advice from experts who serve in the divorce community. A little about me. I'm a former TV producer and mom of two. I got divorced in 2008 when there were really no outlets or platforms for me to turn to. So I'm paying it forward and have created a platform to help men and women learn that there absolutely is a fresh, new, and exciting life after divorce. Come with me on this journey and paint your brand new blank canvas of happily ever after divorce. This episode is brought to you in part by the Cuda Law Firm, guidance that moves lives forward. Cuda divorce and family law attorneys have helped Connecticut families through this process for over 30 years. They understand divorce is so much more than the legal dissolution of a marriage. Divorce is about finding and accepting a new path forward, defining your new family, and securing an enforceable agreement that secures your future. Their experienced attorneys and paralegals are first and foremost committed husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, daughters and sons, who are all devoted to protecting Connecticut families. Put the strength, wisdom, and experience of Cuda behind you and move forward with confidence. Visit them at needlecuda.com. Welcome to another episode of Divorce Doesn't Suck. I'm Wendy Sloane, your host, and today we are talking our 10th of our 12-part series, Mapping Your New Path Forward with attorney Melissa Needle of Cuda Divorce and Family Law. Our topic today, the do's and don'ts when going through a divorce, something super important. Welcome back, Melissa.
Thank you, Wendy. It's good to be here.
Good to have you back. I'm sure there's plenty of do's and don'ts when it comes to going through a divorce, getting a divorce.
Yeah. And the reason that this is a good topic is because once you do something you're not supposed to do, or you don't do something that you should do, it really sets the stage for disaster. So it's important to understand these do's and don'ts before you start the divorce process. So I'm glad that you selected this as a topic. I think it will be very helpful.
Now, is this something that you talk to your clients right away about?
Yeah, usually when someone comes to see me at an initial consultation, depending on what the issues are in their particular situation, I will bring up some of the do's and don'ts that we'll be addressing today, because I want to make sure that they're on the best footing possible if they decide to travel the path of divorce.
I think this is super important. I think when I first started my divorce process, which was a long, long time ago, and several attorneys later, I was never given any do's and don'ts. I went in totally blind, not knowing anything.
And I think that when we discuss these do's and don'ts, the light bulb is going to go off in your head and you're going to say, oh, wow, I wish I had this information. It would have made things so much easier and better.
Yes, I'm sure it will. Okay, so let's dive right into it.
Okay, so one of the things that I always start with when I have new clients, and this is in the do list, you need to be completely honest with your attorney. No matter what you've done, no matter if you think what you have done is going to hurt your case, impact your narrative, you have to be completely honest with your lawyer. And the reason, it seems like such a reasonable, logical reason, you want your lawyer to be armed with the information so that they are prepared and can defend and come up with a narrative, which we've talked about in the past. I can't tell you the number of people that, tell you half of a story and not the whole story. And they don't realize it, but ultimately the only one that they are harming by not being completely transparent and honest with their lawyer is themselves. Because imagine if you're trying to negotiate something or make an argument and then you're blindsided with information that wasn't revealed. It just makes it much more difficult. Whereas if you're forthright and you put all your cards on the table, then you and your lawyer can address it and figure out what you're going to say about it. You could talk about the reasons why you made choices and decisions and come up with a logical, reasonable explanation so that you're prepared when whatever the issue is addressed by the other side. And so,
Because
although it seems logical, I can't tell you the number of people that aren't completely honest with their lawyer. So I always tell clients, I'm on your team, I'm on your side. Everything you say to me is confidential. And so when you go and meet with the lawyer for the first time, be prepared to be honest, even if you feel embarrassed by some of your actions or behaviors.
I would say, because the lawyer needs to be armed with all that ammunition, because if they don't know, they can't protect you. And then when something comes out, like you said, and you're blindsided, makes it hard to backtrack a little bit. And you don't realize when you're going through a divorce, everything gets uncovered. It comes out one way or the other.
And it is so much more credible if you bring up the bad things that you have done or the poor choices that you have made or something that you think is embarrassing. It comes across as much more honest and credible and forgiving if you are the one that brings it up and mentions it and embraces it. So withholding information from your lawyer, that's on the don't side. Honest with your lawyer, that's on the do side. Those are the, different sides of the same coin.
It makes a lot of sense the way you said it like that.
Right. So, and then another do that I do talk to new clients about, especially clients that may not be fully aware of the family's finances. I tell them that they should try to make duplicate copies of financial documents that may be in the home, such as tax returns, credit card records, bank and brokerage account statements, anything that's lying around. Either photocopy it or take a photograph of it. And the reason that I suggest doing that is it gives you a starting point. It gives you some information on which you can rely when trying to figure out the financial landscape of the family. And making copies and getting information is particularly important if you are the spouse that has not been in charge of the finances and may not be as aware of what is out there and what exists. So I always tell people, look around the house. As soon as the word divorce is mentioned, the spouse that is in control of these documents will typically, take them out of the house, put them in a locked cabinet, take away the key, and it becomes a bit more challenging to gather and collect this information. The other thing I say to clients, the flip side of that coin is if you cannot gain access to the information by, going into the office in the house or, the drawer in the desk where this information is retained, don't sweat it. Eventually it will be uncovered and the spouse who is in control will have to produce it. So it's not the end of the world if you're unable to get this information. But if you're able to, then it just makes the process a little bit easier and faster. So that's another, do and don't. Do collect information, but don't sweat it if you're unable to.
Okay.
That makes sense?
It makes a lot of sense, especially so, there's usually always one person that's in charge of all the finances. So hopefully and it's a peace of mind also knowing if you can't get to the finances that you guys will uncover it eventually anyway.
Yeah, and that's why I don't like clients to get anxious because they're uncomfortable walking around the house looking for that information, or if they're just simply unable to get the information. It's not the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want people to stress about that, because we will get the information, especially if you have a good lawyer. It's not only getting the information, it's knowing what information is essential. So
And
go ahead.
what if they suspect that there's money hidden, whether it's overseas or, in other names or in other, assets that they own or what have you?
Yeah, I mean, that happens quite a bit, and that's why the production of documents is really essential, because what a good divorce lawyer will do is they'll hire a forensic accountant. If I have a client who says my spouse is hiding money, they've placed assets overseas, I will hire a very knowledgeable, experienced forensic accountant who will do what we call a tracing, and trace all of the assets back 5 years or more if needed, to follow the money, so to say. So most assets and income streams can be uncovered. It can be a lengthy and expensive process, but well worth it if you really believe that there is significant money that is being shielded from the marital estate. So
Do you find that a lot?
It's not so easy to hide money. I do hear it a lot. I'm typically successful in uncovering that money. Sometimes it's not quite as much as someone thinks. And, sometimes it can be significant. But, there's certain obligations and requirements that people have, such as signing a financial affidavit, and you have to swear under penalty of perjury that it's truthful. And so I think that it does happen a bit, but it's not quite as significant as many people assume.
Okay. And I
Okay.
assume this is all different in every state.
It's different in every state, but in every state, there's spouses who are trying to hide money. That I can tell you.
Yes, I'm sure of that. And they think that
Right.
they'll never get caught one day, but they will. They will.
Yes, they will. If you hire a good lawyer, they will. The other thing that I tell every client who comes into the office for the first time is to change all of their passwords and security settings, because you don't realize it, but your spouse likely knows your password or can guess at your password. You might be sharing an iCloud account, which will give your spouse access to your private information. And so it's really important, if you're going through this divorce process and you want to have some privacy, to make certain that your electronic information is protected. And so I suggest to clients to change their passwords and use some sort of combination that their spouse would not guess. And it's really important, and people that don't do it, oftentimes they are not having conversations that are as private as they think they are. So that's a very critical, easy thing for clients to do if they are going to start the divorce process. And the other thing that I say to them is, you should be very leery that spy software may have been installed on your computer, depending on, who your spouse is. If you have a controlling spouse who seems to know your every move. And what spy software does is it traces the keystrokes on your pad, on your keyboard. And so even if you select a password that is completely random, your spouse may be able to know it if spy software is installed on your computer. So
Wow.
if you think that you have a spouse that may have done that, I would suggest to people either to go out and buy a new laptop or have some sort of computer technician come into your home and analyze your computer to make sure that there is no spyware downloaded on your computer. And that's a very important thing to do, because especially if you hire a divorce lawyer, you want to make sure that your communications with your lawyer and maybe your personal confidants remain protected.
Private.
So,
Yes. What about
yeah,
car
so,
tracking?
yeah, it's interesting that you say that. It's not just car tracking. There's all sorts of apps and that can be downloaded where your phone can be tracked, like Find My Friends and Life 360. And so those are other things that you have to make sure are turned off. Otherwise, your spouse can easily follow you. And the car tracking is an issue. It's again, I hire a private investigator, computer technician who can check these things. But they could check it, and on Monday you could be clean, and you never know what's going to happen on Tuesday. So it's a different world out there, and we have to be very careful, especially if you have a spouse that is controlling and wants to know your every move.
Wow.
And so it's critical that you hire the right lawyer who has the resources to ensure that your conversations are private and your movements are personal to you and not being tracked.
Right. If you're listening out there, and we know you are, write down these do's and don'ts and also make a list for yourself to ask the attorneys that you're interviewing, do you do these things? Do you have, access to these things? Are these things, because these are very important things.
Yeah, they really are. And they can be simple things that you can do. And, that's why I wanted to talk to you about them, because it's easy things to do and could really help through this whole process, which, as we've talked about, can be very difficult and emotional. Another thing that I wanted to bring up is something that is very easy to do. You can check with the history of internet sites visited on the home computer, okay? And that could be good for both spouses. So if you are a spouse who has visited sites and you don't want your other spouse to know, you have to make sure that they're properly deleted. Or if you suspect your spouse is visiting sites that you may want to know about, you too can check the history of internet sites. So that's another thing that I mention to clients when they come to see me for the first time. It's a very simple, easy thing to do, and it can really be very revealing. And so I just wanted to mention that quickly to the listeners out there. Another really important thing that I want to talk about is what the do's and don'ts when there are issues related to custody and your children, because this can really be extremely critical when trying to determine the best interests of the children. So one of the things that I always tell clients, if custody is that issue, is to keep a journal. Document how much time you spend with your children. Document the specific activities that you do together. Document comments that you think are negative that your spouse says, either to the children or within earshot of the children. If your spouse isn't overly involved with the children, document the days or the weeks that they are away and not engaged or present in the children's lives. And the reason we do that is because a divorce can take a very long time. And I always say to my clients, you're not going to remember. You think you're going to remember, but you're not going to remember. And even if you do remember, if you are keeping a contemporaneous record of things that are going on within the household, then you are going to be the more reliable witness, because you're not going to just say, oh, well, I just remember. You're going to say, when it was happening, I was recording it. I was writing it in this journal. And I reviewed this journal before I made this report to you. And as a result of that, you are going to be the one, the spouse that's going to be believed and viewed as credible. So I tell people, leave my office, go to CVS, buy a notebook, or, open up your computer, make sure your computer is in a safe spot, and start journaling. It's critically important, and it will impact what happens with regard to custody.
I'm sure there's a lot more to do, a lot more do's and don'ts when it comes to related to children in custody. Obviously, I not talking in front of the children, keeping the children out of it. What else? What else is there?
Yeah,
I'm sure there's a ton.
Another thing I always recommend is don't involve the children in the divorce proceedings. Don't say to the children, oh, well, we're going to court tomorrow because daddy refuses to pay for your gymnastics lesson. Don't do that. It will come back to bite you. It might feel good in the moment, but it's not good for the children, and it's going to be viewed as a very poor parenting decision, and it will reflect poorly on you. So under no circumstances do you involve the children in the divorce proceedings. Don't leave divorce paperwork out on the kitchen table or somewhere that the children may have access to it. Don't leave letters from your lawyers or emails from your friends about the divorce proceedings on a computer that your children can possibly view. Even if you proactive duty to make sure that it is under lock and key. And if you don't do that, then again, not only is it bad for the children to be involved, but it is going to reflect poorly on your parenting decisions and your ability to parent. So I always tell my clients to be very careful with regard to information related to the divorce and make sure that the children are not involved. And clients will say to me, well, my kid is very inquisitive and very smart. What do I do if they ask me? I don't like to lie to my children. And, what I typically say is, one, if the children have a therapist, run it by them. Ask them what an appropriate response is. Ask the pediatrician what an appropriate response is. And I typically will say to them, try to be vague. Say to the kids, don't worry, dad and I or mom and I, we got this. We're going to figure it out. We're going to work together to figure out what's best for you. And, just try to drop it and not get into it in any detail, because it will reflect poorly on them. Even if you say, well, it's my rule to be honest, sometimes parents have to protect their children. And when a family is breaking up, it's very important that you do that. Don't argue with your spouse in front of the children. Just do not engage. If your spouse wants to get in an argument and the children are there, walk away. Do not engage. it will reflect poorly on you again, and it will negatively impact the children if you're fighting in front of them. I mean, it seems like it would be common sense, but the emotion sometimes gets the best of people. So I really try to emphasize to clients who are going through custody litigation or a fight about parental access and scheduling, do not argue with your spouse in front of the children. And if your spouse is trying to engage you in arguments with your children, go up to your room and start journaling it. Details. What exactly did he say to you? Where were the children when he said that to you? What were the children's responses? How did the children look? How did you feel? Details. So you can use that as a positive by sort of documenting your spouse's nasty, negative behavior that has a poor impact on your children.
And then it turns into on such and such date, my ex was engaging with me in front of the children. This is what he said. This is what happened. This is where I went, et cetera, et cetera. You have it like bookmarked in.
Yeah.
So and you have the exact dates, the times, and all that stuff, which is very important. We're talking do's and don'ts when you're going through a divorce, when you're getting a divorce. Our 10th of our 12-part series, Mapping Your New Path Forward with attorney Melissa Needle. Take a listen from a word from one of our sponsors. As parents, we often struggle and have gut feelings when something just isn't right. This can be especially true in co-parenting arrangements where one parent is struggling with addiction. If you're co-parenting with an ex-spouse who abuses alcohol, SoberLink can help. SoberLink's alcohol monitoring system is the most convenient, reliable, and reasonable way for a parent to provide evidence that they are not drinking during parenting time. The system's real-time alerts, facial recognition, and tamper detection ensure the integrity of each test so you can be confident your kids are with a sober parent. With SoberLink, judges rest assured that your child is safe. Attorneys get court-admissible evidence of sobriety, and your kids are able to maintain healthy relationships with both parents. To sign up and get $50 off your device, visit www.soberlink.com/DDS today. We're back, the do's and don'ts when going through a divorce, and our topic right now is when it's related to custody and with children. These are all such good points and such good advice.
Yeah, and so before we broke, we were talking about the personal journals. And one thing I always say, and I would be remiss if I didn't say it here, is do not leave your personal journals where your spouse can access it. I can't tell you the number of people that say, oh, yes, well, I kept it in my night table drawer. I think he might have gone through it or she might have gone through it. You've gone through this great effort to be smart and write things down so you'll be a credible witness. Do not leave it so that your spouse can access it. And I know it can be very difficult because you want to have it handy, but you have to maybe get some sort of safe or lockbox or keep it in your car that your spouse doesn't have a key to, or leave it at your best friend's house. But you have to make sure that wherever you're storing your journal, your spouse cannot access it. Right. So very critical, very critical. The other thing that I tell clients, and I usually have to tell them throughout the divorce process, do not use emotional language in electronic communications. And the reason I say that is because those electronic communications can be printed out and can be used as evidence against you. So you want to be very matter of fact and transactional in your communications with your spouse. Do not say, you're a terrible father and Johnny knows it, or don't say, you never did this and everyone knows and I hate you. And you have to be very careful of the tone that is used in an email. And I know that it can be very difficult, and oftentimes what I will say to clients is you can draft an email and send it to a friend, or wait an hour, read it again, make sure that it is communicating the information you need to communicate, and make sure that the tone of the email is civil and respectful. Because if it is not, it will be printed out and it will be used against you. That I can promise. And I know it's a very difficult thing to do and to exercise and practice, but it is a very critical habit to get into if you want a good result.
And or also you can go to, which you and I are big fans of, and one of the sponsors of this podcast, Our Family Wizard. And you can only send messages through them because they have the tone monitor meter on it. So if you type something in, they, oh, that wasn't good, or that wasn't nice. And then it forces you to rewrite what you were going to say. So that's super helpful because our emotions are high. We have so much going on, and we all know that texts don't always come off like they're like you want them to the majority of the time, especially when you're going through all this emotion.
Yeah, a lot can be lost in a text, and Our Family Wizard is a fantastic tool that we recommend to families that are, in particular, going through a custody fight. Sometimes it takes, several months before everyone is on board with using Our Family Wizard, so you don't get the benefit of the tools that platform offers. Or you might not even be filing for divorce for a few months. So you need to be very careful about what is said and the tone of the emails. Really, really very important. And like you said, Our Family Wizard is a wonderful platform for divorcing families to get onto. And even if you're not divorcing family, if you just have conflict between you and your spouse, you can use OFW, and or Our Family Wizard, we refer to it as OFW. It really can be a very helpful thing to make sure that your communications are kind and civil.
And with regards to texts and emails, if it's to somebody else, not your spouse, your husband or your wife, can those be taken and used in court? Like, suppose I'm sending a text to, a friend of mine, but I'm talking about the divorce. Can something like that be used?
Yes, they absolutely can. The only communications that are really privileged are the communications you have with your lawyer or someone on your legal team. So you have to be very careful of anything that you put in writing during a divorce, because that information can be uncovered and discovered and can be used against you. It's one thing if you say to, your girlfriend or your sibling, this divorce is really hard, he's being a real jerk or she's being a real jerk. That doesn't really make a difference, but you have to be very careful. Don't share your divorce strategy with someone in writing. Pick up the phone and have a telephone conversation. That's what I tell my clients. It's you have to be very careful and wise during this process. Be thoughtful of what you're putting in writing.
With regards to do's and don'ts, can you record somebody? Can you tape a conversation without someone's consent?
Well, it's different in every state. And in Connecticut, I can tell you that if you are part of a conversation, so if you're in the same room and your husband and you're having a conversation with your wife, you can record her as long as she's part of the conversation.
Wow.
And so you have to also be very careful of what you're saying because you might be recorded. And so it's just smart to disengage, not argue. Don't say negative things about your spouse to your children or within earshot of your children. That too, it's going to come back to bite you. You know, it might be hard to resist and it might feel good in the moment, but in the long run, it's going to reflect very poorly on your ability to parent and your ability to co-parent. And those are the things that the decision makers are really looking to when trying to determine what's best for the children. So you have to be very, very careful and recognize that you are under a microscope and you have to be on your very best behavior. And it can be hard to do. It's a very difficult and emotional process. It's the breakup of your family. There's nothing more important. And sometimes it's hard not to let your emotions get the best of you. And that's why it's always good to have a therapist and a good support system so that you can vent to them and control yourself when you are with your spouse and when you're with your children. Another do and don't is do not say negative things about your spouse to your children or within earshot of your children. I often tell my clients when they have negative emotions that they want to express, they should do that with their support system, their friends and family, their therapists if they have a therapist, but they need to control themselves when they are with their spouse and when they are with their children. It can be very difficult. It's very emotional, but this is a period of time when you are under a microscope. So you need to be very mindful of what you say and your behavior.
Yeah, it's scary when you think about all this because you're in the midst of all this and your head's not really thinking clearly because it's very clouded because there's so much going on and you're in it right now, like you're in the storm. So all these
Yeah.
do's and don'ts are such key points because you don't think about, you're just going to shoot off a text or shoot off an email, you're going to say something out loud, nope, you have to take a step back and know that you could be recorded. This could be, used against you in court, whatever text you just sent, whatever email you just sent. You have to really, this is a great list.
Yeah. And I always say to my clients, it's easy for me to say, and I respect that it's hard for you to do. Because like you said, you are in the midst of a very, very difficult emotional process. And it's not always easy to control everything you do and everything you say. So I tell my clients I respect how hard this is really going to be, but I also try to emphasize how very important it is. So you just have to be thoughtful about that because it will be used against you if you lose control.
Yes.
And the last couple of things I want to say about do's and don'ts is you really you do not allow emotions to control legal decisions. Sometimes it might feel really good to make a decision, but in the long run, it's not the right decision. So you need to really step back and think about the long term. And is this what I really want to do? Like, for example, I might represent a husband, and he might say to me, Melissa, I do not want to pay periodic alimony. The thought of having to write a check every month to this woman who did this to me is something I just can't live with. She doesn't deserve it. It will drive me crazy. And I want to pay her lump sum alimony. I just want to write her one big check and be done with it. And I understand and respect that emotion. But you have to understand the legal implications of lump sum alimony. If your spouse were to remarry 6 months later, then you just wrote her a big fat check for nothing. So this
Right.
is what I mean when I say, do not allow emotions to control legal decisions. You have to be thoughtful, you have to be wise, and you have to have a good lawyer who will make sure that you are making the right decisions for the long run. And then the last thing I want to say, and this is probably the most difficult, is that you need to be patient. Divorce can be a slow, frustrating process, but it is a process. It is not an event that just happens. You don't just wake up one day and say, okay, I want to do this. I've decided to get divorced, and boom, it happens. That's just not the way it works. It is a process. It takes a long time. The system is not very fine-tuned. There are a lot of different variables, and so you just have to know that it's going to take some time. You need to be patient, and you need to let the process unfold. And I tell clients that on day one so that they know what they can expect, through the 9 months, 12 months, 18 months that it may take to get them to the finish line. And I say to clients, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days. There are going to be days when you say, I'm so glad that this is happening. This is the right decision. And you're going to wake up on some days and you're going to say, oh my God, what have I done? What's going on here? I'm so scared. I'm so anxious. I don't know what to expect. And that's okay. You're going to have different emotions on different days, and it's going to take some time. So you need to just know that you can't get frustrated, and the timeline will bear out, and eventually you will get to the finish line, but you need to be patient. And, I always tell people that at their first visit so that their expectations are appropriately managed.
Yeah. Yeah, and just try to manifest and try to visualize your future. Like try to visualize the happily ever after, when
Right.
divorce doesn't suck anymore. When you're,
Yeah.
when you're on your own and you can, paint your brand new canvas and start, reinventing yourself. And it's like, it's like a second chance or third chance, fourth chance for some.
Yeah.
But as
And
hard as it is,
I often say to clients, it's the next chapter. And I
right.
can't wait to see what happens in your next chapter. And it's
That's
usually a very happy chapter.
It's usually a very happy chapter. You just have to keep telling yourself you're going to get there and make a visual board. I heard people are doing that now. The things I've learned, serving this divorce community is people make vision boards and they envision like what they've always dreamed of, what they want to do. And that helps them, look at the rainbow, like there's brightness coming. So
Yeah.
try to put that in your mind.
I love that. I love that. A vision board.
A vision board of what
I might have to add that to my do list, Wendy. Make a vision board.
Add it to your do as well. I was, because I was thinking about all of this when we were going to talk about the do's and the don'ts. I'm like, you struggle, you're gonna struggle, and it's not going to be easy. No divorce is easy, even if it's a happy divorce, or even if both of you are like, you're in this together. It's still it's a death in a sense, right?
Yeah.
So
I often say to clients, I don't know if you'll be happy, but I hope you'll be satisfied.
right.
Because divorce is hard. And then the happiness is what you do when the divorce is over. So
It's easy to think of like the short-term goals, but while you're going through it, but also try and take a minute and breathe and I think I've said this before when we were talking as well, and I've said it a lot. Take a step back, because you're not in a rush. You're not running a marathon here. It might take longer than you thought it would take, but that vision board, important. Think about what's important to you and what you want to do next, and what you've always wanted to do that you never could do.
I love it. I love it, Wendy. Like I said, I might add it to my do list.
It's on your do list, vision boards. It's, maybe it's something we all should do, in our life in general, because, you never know what tomorrow brings, right? So these do's and don'ts, Melissa, super, super important. I'm sure we'll continue to talk about this and add on to this. Our 10th of our 12-part series, Mapping Your New Path Forward. And that's why we say this is mapping your new path forward, because we're going to get there. Yeah. We're going to get to the next, the 2.0 or the 3.0 of your next life.
Exactly.
Thank you once again, Melissa. So helpful. So helpful.